The day-to-day is divided in two parts. The first will be on writing an article, and the second will be on making presentations. The first part is going to be a little bit more lecturing, so it's a heavy lecture. So I have a lot of material in the slides that I want to cover. And it's going to be a lot of do this, don't do that, etc. But it's not meant to be so much this the spirit, but I mean it's a little bit of, let's say, my practice plus reflecting on some best practice and some things I've read in books about how to write articles. Please interrupt me if something you want to share an experience, for example, or if you want to ask something, or if some of these things you're saying here, I've thought it this way but it didn't work or something like that. So interrupt me, but also feel fine if because I'm in a rush I don't pay so much attention to you and I continue fast because I have to cover quite some material. But the second part of this presentation is going to focus on how to deal with the process of revisions, which is the last part of publishing an article. So my goal here is to take 2 hours of the 3 hours. 2 hours of the 3 hours on this presentation is how to write an article, and then 1 hour, which will be more discussion based on the revision process, okay? And then in the afternoon, so you're going to get a lot of lecturing now, but in the afternoon it's going to be mostly discussion around the presentations. So about presentations, there won't be any lecture. We will have presentations from you, short presentations, and then all together discuss and try to see how we can improve them, okay?
Just very quickly, the bathrooms are right here to our left, and you can see the marvelous building in which we are, which is a new building that was built very efficiently, and perhaps later we can have some free time to talk about all the characteristics of the building and all the details. But the bathrooms are right here, and the fountain of water is on that corner.
Is the building finished? Is it supposed to?
This is how it's supposed to look.
Oh, that's the look.
That's the look.
Okay, so how many of you have tried already to write an article and publish it? Okay. Try to publish it, okay. How many of you find it easy? How many of you enjoy it? Okay, yeah, please raise your hand. Let's see how many of you.
Please raise your hand.
Sometimes, some part of it, no? Yeah. Not all of it. How many of you enjoy the whole process all the time? You say, okay, only Irene and Andrea, that's good. And how many of you find it hard? Okay, that's good. And that's a nice quote I found in a book I was reading recently. You know, it says, if you find writing hard, it is because it is hard. And that's important, because many people, they think they find it hard because they are not doing it properly or because something is not going well. No, it's very hard, so if you find it hard, that's the way it's supposed to be, you know. The other thing, though, that it's important is that if you find it hard, it's not, as I said, it's not because you're not having something or you lack something. So writing, at least for science, is a skill. It's not something that you're supposed to have. Let me close the door. It's not supposed something you have in advance, you know, a gift or a talent that you may lack. So I guess if you are to be a novelist, probably you need a little bit of talent. But if you are to be a scientific writer, you just have to learn the skill and the tricks. And it takes time. I mean, I feel I learned it at least 5-6 years after finishing the PhD. I started getting a little bit more satisfied with the articles. So also, another thing is don't be too impatient. So if during your PhD you're not satisfied with your product, that's also normal. You know, you're just learning. It's not going to be your last word. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is two things. First of all, identify the features of a good journal article, so the basic structure and what I think its components should have. But then I want to discuss in the second part a little bit about also the process of writing, which some of you have seen this presentation. I want to say that even if you've seen it, it's fine, because you've learned a lot since you last saw it, and I think in different stages of our careers we can get different things from here. But also what you will see today that it's different is I'm going to focus a little bit also on the process, the psychology, the planning, so a little not only on the elements of an article, but also on how do we do it. So just to make clear that I take some things for granted, and I take it for granted because most of the people I see here also have taken this course in ENTITLE about designing a research project, and the rest of the people from ECTANO have taken related courses. But of course, the basis for any good article is to have a good research project, okay, with clear research questions, clear methods, good empirical information, good arguments, good literature review. So all these are skills that I will take now for granted, so I can't go into explaining how to write a literature review or how to come up with good questions, okay? So we assume that you have them, which of course is not the case, no? Because when you write, you realize you don't have them and then you work with it. But we will have to assume that I won't have to teach about these things. And I'm not going to teach about the publication process. This Maria Kaika and Eric Zvingendal taught in the last summer school, you know, like which journals to choose, how to send the articles, so this is not part of today. So what I want also to emphasize is that what we are learning today is writing for a journal article for political ecology. What this means is that the type of writing we are discussing here, some of the things are relevant for each and every writing, but I want to emphasize the particularities of the journal article. So it's very important to have in your mind that when you're writing a journal article, it's not the same as writing a policy report. It's not the same as writing a report for an NGO or a report that you want to, let's say, bring to attention some injustice that is happening against something, against a corporation or against a government body. So it's not the same type of document. And within the field of science, I want to say that when we say about political ecology, we are thinking either of journals of environmental science or geography. So like journals like Geoform, Environment and Planning, Global Environmental Change, Ecological Economics, the journals we are typically writing for. There are a few differences if what we were writing for were journals, I don't know, in economics or in climate science or in natural science. So there are some particularities of, let's say, writing a journal article of social science, okay? So it's going to be specified on that. So my first question is that I want to ask you is, why do you write? Why do you want to write? Let's start. What's the reason for writing?
Because you have something to say. Otherwise, you wouldn't.
Because you have something to say, but you could say it orally. Why write it in a journal article?
So you can get a job.
Yeah. You have a career in the academia if you publish them.
Okay, getting a job and a career in the academia, so that's the only reason you're writing for it. Irina is getting... She was the only one who enjoyed it, so she must have a better reason than that.
For me, it's therapy.
Therapy.
Yeah, it's a process through which I'm disentangling all my crazy thoughts, and I put them in a way that I try to make sense. It's a complicated process, and this way I can express myself better. I mean, I've always expressed myself better in writing rather than talking, I think.
You don't want any viewers for this. This is
no, actually, the reviewing part for me was the best. Because it's really like, it's tough, but in a good way. It really makes you understand like what is lacking from my own reasoning process.
But why others are writing? So did we cover everything? For academia, for career, and for therapy?
To engage with the scholar, other scholars, because that's what everybody does. So you have to write to engage with.
To engage with other scholars, to communicate to other scholars,
and to register, so it will be registered. Like we stay when we speak orally, things can change in a way.
To register what you want to say, because orally it's a different format. Yes?
It's an extension of thinking in a way, forming up your argument.
Extension of thinking, so you develop your thinking also through writing. Any noble goals more than...
I don't know if it's a good reason, but to get recognition of the ideas.
To get recognition of the ideas you want to express, have them recognized, not published.
Have it as argument, you see, there is even an article in the subject.
Yes, but
there is even an article.
The question is why we are writing our thoughts or why we are writing, we strive to write for a journal.
Sure.
These are different questions.
Oh, no, okay, exactly. So why do you write, not for a journal, in general?
In general, we write because it is like
Say this to me.
a very nice skill that we have as people, as human beings. We have this nice skill, and we We exercise the skill because it's nice.
So to express your skill, no? To express some kind of desire.
And for me as a consumer, it's important because I can take it more seriously when something is written, because I think people have sort of peer reviews things going on, so I say, okay, that's sort of proof.
Yeah, it's similar to it's the other side of what Francois said. He says, I want to write so that what I want to argue is taken seriously. Rita? Okay.
So to put ideas to serve as a base for further publishing in other styles.
Yeah, to advance the debate. Okay, I thought you would start with something more novel, but since you didn't, it's even easier. No, but there are many reasons, and I think you touched on more of that. But I mean, the first thing is like many of you do this research because you feel you want to do something better. No, I change this world, and I mean it generally, either socially or in terms of knowledge and science, or to change some perceptions, participate in debates. But there are other things that are going on when you are writing, You're trying to make sense of your own work, like put your thought in written form, and that's how you develop. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say, And you do that through writing. You're trying to communicate your research to others, to your community. But I think there is also another factor, which is a little bit related to what Angelos said, but it's also, I think, you want, or you aspire to give some pleasure also to the people who read it, You're a little bit of a small novelist in you when you write, You don't want people to read it and say, what a boring crap is this, You want someone to read it and say, okay, I enjoy that, because you enjoy also some articles, Sometimes you read something and you really enjoy it. It's not just the ideas, just changing the world, it's also the pleasure of reading a piece of work that you really like, It's the same as a book or a nice movie or a nice documentary. But of course, the pragmatic reasons are always there. You are into academia, so you have to get published and be cited. But the point is not just to see the publication and the citation. I mean, the trick is how to do this while remembering why you are there. And what do I want to say is that to get published and cited is not just I want to do it because I want to get a postdoc or I want to stay in academia. You want to get published and cited because if you don't get published and cited, no one will read your work. You won't communicate to anyone. And cited means that more people read it and more people pass it to one another. That's all that citations mean. So it's not just, don't take that as just an egoistic or vain motivation. Oh, I want to get published in a good journal for the sake of it or for my career, and it's just selfish. At the same time you are doing that, you are pursuing all your other goals, which is people to get to know about interesting stuff, change a little bit the knowledge, change the debates, etc. But this, let's say, is a precondition for all this to happen, because if you don't get your work published and if no one reads it, none of these things can happen, apart perhaps from the personal pleasure that Angelos talked about and the psychotherapy of Irina. No? But other than that, you need to get published and cited. So this is what we are going to focus. How? No, this stuck. How to get published and cited. Okay, so this class is going to cover, as I said, the structure and components of a journal article, and this is going to take probably the good part of the time until the break. What time are we having break? 11. Okay, so until the break, I think we're going to focus on number 1. And number 2, 3, 4 are not that big, so don't think that if we take so much time for one, it's going to take hours and hours to cover this. So let's start with the first one. So first of all, what is a journal article? It's a written output of your research in a concise format, and concise is an important keyword, so it has to be something short and concise. It can't be you thinking over 15,000 words, okay? It's normally 4,000 to 8,000 words. 8,000 words plus references is the standard in our journals. But if you want to publish in a high-impact scientific journal that some of you might want to publish at some point, then it's 4,000 words, so you have to be very concise. What does the journal article do? And this is really important. Who are you writing for? You're not writing in the journal article. I'm not talking now about your motivations for writing. I'm talking about writing a journal article, okay? When you're writing a journal article, who is the audience? Who should you imagine you're writing for? It's not for the society at large. It's not for the people you studied. It's not for the indigenous community that you happen to work with. You're not writing for them the journal article. You can write for them other things, but not the journal article. You're not writing for your beloved ones, although you always give an acknowledgement, thank my partner, etc., etc. But you're not writing for them, not for your parents, you know? It's good if they understand what you're writing, but it's not them, your audience. It's not policymakers. That's another mistake. No, I'm writing for policymakers. First of all, policymakers will never read your stuff. They never have time to read anything. Apparently, they are very busy people, you know, unlike us. But that's not the moment where you will influence policymakers. You can influence them with a policy brief, and we're going to have an exercise how to do that, no? But it's not the journal article that's going to influence the policymakers or the media. You can write a media, a press release. But the journal article you're writing for your research community. Who is your research community? Who do you want to imagine when you're writing? It's the readers of the journal you're submitting. If you know some of the people who are reading this journal, imagine that you're writing for them. If you can't imagine anyone like them, then your colleagues, us here, you know? So you're writing for us. So when you write, think, okay, if Federico writes, what would Angelos think about this article? Or what would Andrea think about this article? They are the ones who should understand and like this article. It's not someone else. And the journal article communicates in a format and in a structure that this community recognizes. So the community has to recognize the format. If suddenly you write a poem, it doesn't mean that it's bad, but it means that, okay, this is not the standard format of the community. We're going to discuss about it, okay, about different formats. But what's the basic structure of a journal article? Okay, you all know it, I'm not saying anything new, but we're going to cover each part separately. So it's the abstract, where you summarize your questions, findings, arguments, contribution. It's the introduction, where you motivate your research. Why are you doing it? Why should we pay attention? What are your research questions? And then you introduce a little bit, either in the introduction section or in a section after, your theory, where you take your vocabulary, where are your ideas coming from, and the literature you are contributing to. Who else has done similar things, and what do you have to say to them? That's the dialogue I was saying before with your research community. Who are you writing to? What are they discussing, the people you are writing for? Then is the results, the methods. You have to describe what methods you use to get evidence. Then it's when you present your main results and arguments, your findings, and then you discuss them. Discuss them means you say what I did and what I found, how does it relate with the broader debates? What do I contribute? What does my study contribute? And then you conclude. We're going to see these pieces one by one. But some of you might question, you know, why such a rigid structure? Isn't this too natural science? Are you not too tunneling us into a straitjacket? Okay, I would say that there are some reasons for which to follow this given structure. So in general, as humans, we are used to have certain patterns. Okay, we have to break them from time to time. So I agree that we have to break them. But for example, now there's a pattern that we are sitting like that. You know, if suddenly you all started looking this way or going to the window while I talk, this would break a little bit the pattern and would make us feel uncomfortable. Maybe we would create something else, but let's say the majority of the times we need a certain pattern. So when somebody receives your article, indirectly, or you as a reviewer receive an article, you expect to find this pattern. So you expect to find first the introduction and then the results. If someone starts with the methods and goes to the results, maybe you get a little bit disoriented. This doesn't mean that you can't be creative. It doesn't mean it has to be, you know, introduction, results, one by one, doing always the same thing. You can be creative around that, you know. You can be creative, but you can be creative as you might be dancing a dance that you know the steps and then you are improvising on top of it. Or if you're playing a music that you know the rules of the motif you're playing, but you play on top of it. So you can change the heads of the titles, you can mix some things or put the methods in a more unlikely place, yes, but you know the general structure, so you're not messing too much with the general structure. What I want to say here is if you are beginner writers, feel free and actually do it. Copy the structures of others. Take the structure of a paper you like a lot and follow it paragraph by paragraph. I do this exercise with my students. I say, okay, take this article and copy. Like, what does she do in this paragraph? Do the same thing. What does he do here? Do the same thing exactly. He's discussing here literature. You discuss literature in the same way. copy the structure, but you won't copy the content, of course, because then you will be plagiarizing. But there is no need for you to copy any content, no? Because you will take a paper that is doing something completely different. But you can copy a little bit structure, or you can even copy formats of sentences, like how do these people express themselves. So learn from others, and don't think that you are copying something there. You know, you're not supposed to come on your own with something. You can copy others as long as you're not copying content. Okay? And someone might say, okay, I just read the essay of Foucault on governmentality, and I didn't see him starting with introduction. No, you would be right, but I mean, if you're sure you're Foucault, try it. You know? If you have any doubt, wait for a little while until you're sure you're Foucault, and then you try it. Okay? For the time being, try to follow the structure. When you think I am Foucault, do it, okay? So I'm not gonna stifle your creativity, but just be patient with it. So, the elements of a good journal article. Let's start with the first one. So, an intriguing title that hints to an argument. So, the title is important. It's not the most important, but I think it's important. So, a small exercise. Which of these titles do you think is good and which one is bad?
The second is the good one.
Yeah.
What is
The second?
Why?
What is the second?
You don't like my title?
The first one, I don't see. Okay, I was missing.
You can actually see.
Yeah, we can see the third. Can you read the third one?
Which one?
Can you read loudly the third one? We can see it.
The third one.
Yeah.
Just wait until there is a drought, mediating environmental crisis for urban growth. Okay.
It's creative, but it doesn't really tell you much.
I think that's the white part.
White from the city is really good.
Okay, this is for sure the beginning.
Yeah.
No, why farm the city? So you already start with an intriguing question, a paradox, something that motivates you. No, urban gardening. Why is it happening? Why now? You know. So you just have it there in the title, so it motivates you. But the second part of it.
If you don't know what metabolic rift is, it's...
Okay, one thing is metabolic rift is a problem. And what is the second part doing? Like, what is it describing? Is it describing the argument of the article, or?
No, like...
The contribution he wants to...
Yes, it's signaling what the article is doing, not what the article is about. Okay, so ideally, the title should hint to what the article is doing, not what you are doing. Very often we are describing what we are doing in the title, exploring new tendencies in, developing the theory of. This is common sometimes in the article. I find this boring, and I mean, I've read about research titles, and many people say that that's not the way to write your title. It's better that your title describes the causal relation of the main phenomenon you're studying, or the main argument you're making. So if your article is about, in this sense, this is better. If it's about environmental crisis and urban growth, you might have to say something about how environmental crises play out into urban growth. What's your main argument about how environmental crisis and urban growth are your keywords? Then you have some idea about how environmental crises contribute. You have a verb which links environmental crisis to urban growth, and you change this into a noun. Okay? So here he says mediating, which you don't like. Why? Because it's a very general word, no? So what does it mean, mediate? Of course they mediate, but what does it mean? If you can get more specific there, then the thesis of your article is there, It's like how environmental crises do something for urban growth. So if he had here, why farm the city? The next part should be the argument. Okay, why farm the city? He should give us some hint of why people farm now in the city, rather than telling us what theory he's going to use. Okay? Mm-hmm. Why is this a bad title? Other than the fact that I wrote it. But I wrote it very young, It's 2001. I hadn't even started my PhD, so it's fine.
It's not so inspirative.
It's not about liminal comments. We didn't do liminal comments in our PhD, We have to do the EU framework directives.
It's the title of the report.
It looks like the title of a report.
It's the title of a report. So at that time I was just off working in the European Parliament, so I was still writing reports, you know, and no one told me what's the difference of a report and a journal article. So you're lucky.
But they published you.
They
published you.
They published it, and it's my most cited article. For the wrong reasons, though, you know. I'm not proud that people cite this article. So anyways, for my CV was good. No, what was the trick of this article? This legislation was just coming at that point. I was the only one who knew what it was about, so I explained it. So then all the people who did research on the Water Framework Directive would feel they have to cite this article. And I mean, that's not what you want to do. I think you want to do something more than just get cited. That's a good example, right? So the point is to get cited also for something interesting. Okay, abstract. So abstract for me is the most important thing in an article.
Can I ask something?
Quickly, yes.
Yes, but when you decide about the title of an article, you don't want a little bit to also to use some words that someone, when is trying to do the literature review, when puts the Google Scholar like these words.
No, because you put it in the keyword.
Like, doesn't matter.
No, not for the title, because you have also keywords. And then when people do Google Scholar, they find you by keywords, also by words in the abstract. So don't use the title for that reason. Yes.
Can I just sort of make a comment related to the last slide about the titles? I think you showed like 2 different types of titles that you could use that are good, but then there's a third one also that you can use, just like different types. So you have like the one where maybe it was a quote with the third one. Just wait until there's a drought. Like sometimes they use that and then describe what the article is, and then sometimes you can just describe exploring through this method. It's actually like a very scientific type. And then also they have like starting with a question or
no, but the exploring, etc. What I'm saying now, because here I'm not just describing the different types. I'm saying which are good. So like describing your scientific thing, like he does here, I don't think it's a good idea for the title. Having a question or having like a quote that it's sometimes it's a phrase that someone told you, you know, from your interviews. That's a good idea, especially this one of putting your research question, and then explaining what you're going to argue. That barely this article does here. Okay. So for me, the ideal, let's say, the best is your question in a provocative way, and then your answer to your question in a summarizing way. If not that, at least the quote, no, the intriguing quote that captures the essence of your argument, and then your argument explained scientifically. But not this thing, not what you're doing scientifically or what you're contributing in the literature. But of course, many people do it. This is advice for best practice, let's say. I'm not saying that it's the only way to do it. So the abstract should capture the essence of your article in 200 words. So why is the abstract important? Because I've been a reviewer, I've been an editor also, you know. I can tell you that 50% at least of the opinion of a reviewer is framed at the moment of reading the article, especially of editors in journals, you know. They receive the article, they receive your article, they look at the journal, and this is where more or less they decide, okay, I'm gonna send it for reviews, this looks a promising article, this doesn't look a promising article, the abstract. So it's super decisive. But even if not for that, even if to not get published, to get cited after, you know that when people look through Google Scholar, you look through Google Scholar and you get all this information, or you see the new table of contents of, I don't know, Geoforum for this month, you always look in the abstract. So it's the part of your article that will be read the most often. So it has to be impeccable and really drive home the message of your article. It should not be descriptive or summarizing. It should not include, ideally, jargon or references. So don't refer to the work of others, and not use jargon that people might not be familiar with. When we say people, ideally it should be everyone, but especially, you know, your research community, as we said. If you can write so simple that anyone would understand the abstract, this is ideal. If not, because it's difficult, at least make sure that your research community understands what you are talking about, that you're not using a term that is just for your small research community. Okay? So would everyone understand metabolic rift? That's a little bit questionable, you know? But okay, it's a borderline. It's a term that is quite famous. Metabolism too. Commodity frontier, yes, but maybe if we have a new term that we use in the growth debates like conviviality, if you mean it differently, you have to be careful how you use it in the abstract, when you don't have time to explain what exactly you mean. So, yes, something? No, okay. My analysis of the structure of a good abstract, and again, here I'm giving recipes, but you can improvise around the structures, okay? But my idea of a good structure is first sentence, first 1 or 2 sentences, your motivation. Why are you doing this research and article? Your research question, 1 sentence on your methods, and then 1 to 3 sentences, your main arguments and findings. Finally, your contribution. Okay. This might seem too specific, but let's see it in practice. Yes?
To what extent do you prefer to put your arguments and findings more explicitly? To what extent do you prefer to generalize it, summarize it so that...
Super explicitly. Let's see it here in practice, okay? Can someone try to read the first sentence? Or is it too small?
No. During the 19th.
Okay, so the paper starts, okay, the title. Why did the West extend the franchise? It means the democracy, okay? Why did the West get democracy, you know? Democracy, inequality, and growth in historical perspective.
That's a good title.
Okay, this is a okay title. Maybe it could say what's a link between democracy, inequality, and growth. But the abstract is very good. So let's follow this basic idea. Motivation, question, arguments, and contribution, okay? First question is, the motivation is there implicit. During the 19th century, most Western societies extended voting rights, a decision that led to unprecedented redistributive programs. Okay, that's your motivation. That's an important topic now. During the 19th century, suddenly we started having democracy and we started also having redistribution. That's a big historical phenomenon, you know. The question is not there, but it's implicit. Why? Why did this happen? Okay. So you start motivation, big phenomenon. Why did this big phenomenon happen? Methods is not here. He doesn't say something on methods, okay? But they do say about their main arguments and findings. They say, we argue that these political reforms, democracy, okay? The democratic reforms that took place in the 19th century, can be viewed as strategic decisions by the political elite to prevent widespread social unrest and revolution. Political transition, rather than redistribution under existing political institutions, occurs because, this is an argument, no? Because current transfers do not ensure future transfers, while the extension of the franchise changes future political equilibria and acts as a commitment to redistribution. Okay, this is a little bit economistic here, but the basic argument, what basically they are saying is like, okay, why did democracy take place? It was a promise of future transfers. There was conflict, there was threat of revolutions, and they said, okay, with democracy, you get a sort of promise that in the future you're going to get some redistribution back. So this would appease revolutions, okay? That's the main argument of this article. It's here, starts, motivation, question. The main argument is there. Then the contribution finishes with the last sentence, which is the contribution. Our theory offers a novel explanation for the Kuznets curve in many Western economies during this period, with a falling inequality following redistribution due to democratization. The Kuznets curve basically says that as countries developed economically, inequality is reduced. They are saying here, no, we are offering a new explanation. It's because of democratization and the redistribution it brought, okay? So that's the basic structure of a good abstract. Now, is this a good abstract? You know it just by looking at it. You see how you make your mind about abstracts. That's why I say it's very...
Nobody wants to read it.
No, you don't want to read the things. It's full of big words, full of difficult terms. It's not clear what's the motivation. The motivation is too abstract at the beginning. So they say something about the growth, but I didn't. I mean, I had to review this paper, and when I saw it, I was already made my mind. Okay, this probably, you know, this is what I mean. You know, look, you see this abstract, and you're like, okay, I'll read the rest of the paper, but really difficult, you know.
Do you think some reviewers wouldn't even read the paper?
No, because you have to write the review, so you have to write it. But you're already pissed because you say, now I have to read all this paper, you know, that I know it's going to be crap, but then you have to read it. Amelie.
Somebody once told me that the first sentence should be a really strong, affirmative, interesting, like a short sentence actually. so that it really captures your attention. Would you agree, or?
In the abstract, yes. In the abstract, yes. Fede?
This article is mine. I'm joking, it's a joke.
Hope so. Okay, so this is an abstract we just finished writing with Fetan and Christos. You know, I think both of them, or most of you know both of them. So this is, we just submitted it to Global Environmental Change, okay? So let's see how we did it. So this is about seasonal agricultural workers in Turkey. And we are claiming that the policies of the Turkish state for their adaptation to climate change are a form of biopolitics, okay? So most of you are familiar with these terms. But let's say, we're writing for global environmental change. People might not be exactly familiar, but let's see the structure. So what's the first sentence? Who can someone read it from there?
It's a literature gap.
Literature
gap.
Okay, read it if you want. Can you read it loud?
There is a growing interest on the links between climate change and migration, but the literature so far has mostly focused on climate, refugees, permanent migrants, and the implications for destination countries.
Okay, and the next one. Seasonal workers, one of the most socially vulnerable groups in the agricultural sector, have received scant attention. So our motivation is like, look, there is a literature about climate change and migration, but no one has talked about seasonal migration, no? So this is the motivation. We don't have a research question. I realized when I was doing this analysis ex post, because when we were writing the abstract, it was a little bit implicit what we were doing. But okay, the impact would be how are states trying to cater for the adaptation of seasonal workers, or something like that, you know? We're saying, yet several governments are already planning action to ensure the adaptation of seasonal workers to a changed climate. So we're saying, but already a lot of things are happening on that, but we haven't started them. That's the basic argument here. That's the motivation. Why do we need to do this research, you know? Okay, then we are saying what this article is doing. This article focuses on two recent social and climate change policies adopted by the Turkish government. And then we are saying our methods. Based on a discourse analysis of the two policies and fieldwork carried out on a site of intervention, this article argues, okay, main argument, you know, it's like take-home message, let's say it's there. Such policies, although taken in the name of adaptation, are in fact biopolitical interventions. Their main aim is to secure the uninterrupted circulation of commodities and workers rather than to reduce the root causes of vulnerability. We contribute to the literature on biopolitics and climate change. So do you get it? Is it clear? Should I move on or?
It's clear. It's really
okay, it's clear. Okay.
Can I add something? Do you think, because this is like the motivation here is more of a scientific motivation, like a gap in the literature that you're trying to cover, but the previous one I think was more of a, or generally people say, no, in the world we have this big phenomenon that everybody's interested in, but that has affected so many people. So it's more of a,
I think it should be a combination of the two. So big phenomenon here, also the big phenomenon is implicit, no? It's climate change and damages to vulnerable populations, but then it has always to link also with the scientific motivation. We don't know enough about it or why does it happen, you know? So it's always like also the question there.
I would agree, and then it seems like at some time you could propose two methods here. Like when we speak about seasonal workers, I could imagine there was like an empirical work, like following the seasonal workers, moving to one place, and then we have the discourse analysis, which are discussing like the policies.
No, we just describe it here, you know, we cite like discourse analysis and field work, that's all. Here I'm saying about the structure. So the structure is describe your methods there, so that it's clear what you did. Irina?
Maybe you mentioned, but I didn't hear it. Is it a certain sequence? So, for example, we cannot start with the idea with something like this paper is drawing on a case study and is meant to.
No, I mean this goes to what I said about the motif. You know, like my suggestion is this: motivation, question, method, arguments, and this is what I've seen in many good abstracts. It's hot, eh? It's hot, so maybe we'll have to over. But play around it, you know. If you feel you can play around it, play. But I think this is like, let's say, bottom line. Okay, so now I have to rush. Introduction, very important. I think this is the remaining 40%. We had 50% in the abstract, 40% of the reviewer's decision is based on the introduction. So here it's the same mentality with, let's say, the first 2 to 3 sentences of the abstract, you develop them, no? So here you develop a captivating start, and you have to really explain what's the research question you are engaging with. You have to start with a paradox, with something that hasn't been explained, with something that needs explaining. In our case, for example, seasonal migrants, they haven't been studied. That's what we explain there, but then it takes us 2 paragraphs to explain it. We put references to the literature on climate change and migration, and then we point to the limits, to the gaps. You have to give some contextual information on why this is an important subject. And by contextual information, I mean what Penny said, both in terms of the general subject, like climate change, and there are concerns about the climate change IPCC, but also the literature context. Set out your research questions. Here is where you define your research questions in the introduction. And it's important because you are defining your community and the contribution you are aspiring to. So here it is like, okay, this is a debate where I'm going to enter. This is what, it's migration and climate change. You are the global environmental change community. This is how I frame it. This is where I'm contributing. You state this in the introduction. And then it's good, I didn't used to do that, but I learned it from a colleague in Berkeley who is doing it, and I find it good. Summarize your key arguments and findings also in the introduction. Say, this is what I'm going to argue in this article. And then do it again later. But, you know, sometimes the messages, you have to hammer it in the heads of people, you know, in the abstract and in the introduction and in the conclusions. And then you give the structure. This you know it, nah? Section 2 does this, section 3 does that. So,
can I just ask, I read a lot of articles that have, they start with a vignette or a story that isn't like related necessarily to the paper. And sometimes like it turns me off and I'm just like, okay, skip this, and then, you know, go down to where they're actually talking about what their contribution is.
No, the vignette is very common in political ecology and geography, no? Or some words that someone said in your field work, then you start with that. Okay, that's a possible start, but it's a tricky one. You have to do it well. So if you can handle it, do it. If not, many times what can happen is you say a story. This we'll see at the end is the cohesion issue. So you start with a story, and then the rest of the argument is not exactly about this story. So you say something interesting that some people said, and it's like, they are doing this to us here, you know, and then your article is not about what they are doing to them there, but it's about something else, you know. So the vignette needs to be carefully taken, but it can be a captivating start, yes.
I almost always write the introduction last, and I think it.
Okay, this we'll see it after in the structure, because there are different writing styles.
Kind of things.
Yeah, I write it always first, so we're gonna discuss about different writing styles. On these things, there is no one way of doing things.
How about the use of quotations, like to start, like the ones you used in your article? I really like that, but one of the reviewers actually really disliked that.
What quotation?
I don't know what the name is in English.
Yeah, no, the reviewer, what he or she said was, don't use them if they don't add something after. So if they are trivial, don't use them. So I think you can use them sometimes. I use them often, but it's important that they offer something more than what you're going to say in the text after, or they create like a more complete picture. If you are putting something that then it's redundant and it's clear, okay, geographers said that utopias should be studied, okay, why put it in such a prominent place? I think that was the criticism there.
Should you take direct reference to that quote then?
No, but I mean the content, it should be complementary to the content. It should be repetitive, your content to the quote you put there, you know. It should be something extra that gives you something more. So for example, this paper here, start with a research question, you know. So this is a paper about the different growth patterns in different societies, you know. And it just says, what are the fundamental causes of the large differences in income per capita across countries? I think the title of this paper is why some nations are wealthy and others are poor. Okay, it's a general question, but you start with it. It's a motivating question because it's a big question, you know. So, okay, that's interesting. What does this paper have to say about that? So you start with a motivation. Okay, this you read it. I'm not gonna go that. Here we didn't start, I think, so motivated, but as you saw, it pressed us a lot in the review process to give a context of the growth. So what we tried to do in the first paragraph of the article that you read, in the second version, is to a little bit give more the context. This is what I told you before, no? Where are you coming from? Because now we are writing for geographers, they don't know the growth, they don't particularly care about it. So it's normal to receive this criticism that we received, which is like, okay, why should we care about it? So what we try to do in the first paragraph of the introduction is to make clear why should they care about it. Okay? And this is, you saw it in the article that you read. This is the structure. You always have to give some structure to your reader to follow your line of reasoning. Again, some people don't do that, but they are very skillful writers where especially anthropologists who write well sometimes, they do it almost as a story. So you follow the story and you don't really have seen the sections, you know? This is a little bit good student stuff, no? Say the sections so that people can follow you. If your narrative is so strong that people follow it as a story and they drink it like a nice drink, you know? Then you don't need that. But if there is some ambivalence about the structure and people may get confused, it's always important to have it there. Now, the extra thing that we did here is what we normally do when we describe the structure is we just describe the contents by repeating them again, which is boring, you know? Like section 2 will present the method, section 3 will present the main results of this study, while section 4 discuss them, and section 5 conclude, you know? Okay, this we don't need you to tell us now. So what we do here, I do two things. You remember I told you tell the arguments in the introduction, your main findings. So here we combine these two tasks. So we both say our main arguments for the article, and we say how these arguments are going to develop in the article. So it's a mixture of what we are going to argue and what is going to be the structure of the article. So it's basically not what are the contents of each section that is following, but what is the argument of each section and how does the argument tie together.
Have you stated your arguments before this paragraph already, or this is the first time you state them?
I mean, it's the end of the article. I mean, as Melissa said, you always go back. So, of course, this we wrote it at the end.
No, I'm saying like this is the last section of your introduction.
Yeah,
already?
yeah.
And before this last section, have you already stated your arguments?
No, I've stated the questions. So these are more or less the answers to the questions or the motivations. So method section. Geographers or political ecologists sometimes are very vague with their methods. I don't like that, you know. It's like we spent some time there, we did this. When they do that, I'm very suspicious that they haven't done a lot of field work, you know. And I think in our research it's really important for some people to get a sense also of the amount of work you've put and like, really, where did you get your evidence from? Well, how should we trust what you're doing? It's just your personal opinion from staying 2 months, which is fine also, you know, but then be frank about it, you know. But I think it's really important to be as specific as it gets and as transparent as it gets with your method. I don't think you can get too specific with that. So don't worry if you say, okay, am I giving too many details? No, I want to know if you did interviews, what did you ask the people? Give me a summary, you know? Who did you interview? How many people did you interview? And what demographics were they? Here, this is an article we wrote with Jan Otero on water history of Mata de Pera. We were very specific, you know, we looked at the archives of the municipality from 1913 to 1958, then we interviewed older people who remember what happened in the Civil War, and we interviewed both right-wing and left-wing sympathizers. So specific, you know, what methods did you use? This normally is either a separate section, a small section, or it's the end of the introduction, okay? But I find this section very important, yes?
Just wanted to say, remembering what you said at the beginning, that this article, when I wrote this article, I really looked at the structure and went through and totally copied it, how it was structured. And for me, it helped me a lot to see, as an example of how to look at something and then say, oh, okay, how I have to convert them to my ideas, really. And sometimes coming back and reading it again to understand the order of some things, it really helped me a lot.
And I think I copied a little bit the structure of Eric's Wingendel, so you remember. Plus the methods. I think Eric doesn't write about methods, and this I think we can improve on that. I think it's important to have the methods clear. Yeah. Who raised their hand? No. Okay.
Actually,
yeah.
Just ask. I recently got feedback asking me if it's possible to list my interviewees or even their position and the organizations that I interviewed. Is that common at all? I just want to make sure that it is.
Sometimes sometimes it depends on your arguments whether it's important to say who is saying what is saying, because sometimes you might say something and if you don't know if this is from a person in the field or from someone high-level policymaker or whoever, then you need to contextualize the information. So if they ask you for that, it makes sense. If they ask you to list exactly who you interview, some people can ask that level of specificity, but then you have to handle the issue of privacy, etc. So yeah, I mean, this you deal with the reviewers directly. So the findings, Okay, as I said, I'm not going to talk about what makes a good argument, but it's important to list all your arguments and the evidence you bring to support them as against counter-arguments. So this I'm going to talk also in the process of writing, but it's important to have a list of your arguments. What are my main 4, 3, 5, 2 arguments that I'm going to make in this article, or which is the main argument and the sub-arguments that support it. And what evidence, by evidence I don't mean necessarily empirically, it can be theoretical reasoning, you know, but what evidence do I have to support each of these arguments? Arguments mean because of something, this is happening because of something. This is a pattern that I described like that, you know, so but your main argument should be very clear. And you have to think what facts, and I put facts within quotation marks to mean that by facts, again, I don't mean necessarily data. It can be data, it can be something else, but what do you have to back up what you're claiming? That's the important question, you know. I make this argument, what do I have to back it up? Is it I have a reasoned argument? Do I have logic that backs up this argument? Do I have data which shows that these are the trends? And if I have this data that I have these trends, could someone explain it differently? What's my argument that this is the main explanation for this data? This is what makes good the argument. Okay, this I'll skip it a little bit to speed it up. You can see it, but so the last part is your contribution, and this normally takes place in the discussion section or whatever is close to the discussion section, and separately in conclusions. Okay. So by contribution, mainly, remember, this we discussed it when we were talking about research, no, and asking research question. When you're doing a research, you're basically solving a problem or responding to your research community, not to the society at large. But the answer you are giving to this research problem or research community has a social implication. You remember this subtle difference, okay?
No.
You remember, no? We were saying about the tire of a bike that goes flat, you know? The research question is why the tire got flat, why there's no air. This is the research question. The practical implication is how do we fix the bike, okay? You remember this difference. So, your contribution is conceptual first and foremost in a journal article, but then you can spell out what does this have to tell us in social terms, or in policy terms, or in transformational terms, okay? But you have to make very clear what's your conceptual, your research contribution. For example, link your arguments into a broader thesis of the discussion. So you have a list of arguments, and you have to say, okay, what is my overall thesis, my overall contribution with these arguments? For example, our theory offers an explanation for. That's your main thesis. Or while others found that X, we argue that Y. This changes the way Z is seen. These are standard phrases, but they give you an idea of what you have to do in the discussion section. The discussion section, what many people do mistakenly, for example, is in the discussion section to go back and discuss. So they don't know what exactly they have found, and then they say, okay, maybe this, maybe that. So they think discussion means like brainstorming around what the results were, you know? That's not what a discussion is. A discussion is like, okay, these are my main arguments, and this is the big picture. This is the big picture, and that's how my big picture relates to the big pictures of others. Okay, that's what a discussion means. It doesn't mean I start discussing. Make clear how your findings differ from those of others and how they push forward debates. And discussion is the point of generalizing, you know? I'm saying something more general here. I'm not talking just about this particular commodity or this particular community. I'm saying something that is relevant overall to global environmental studies, is relevant overall to ecological economics. I generalize from my specific study, and the place for this to happen is in the discussion mostly. Is that clear or not? Does it resonate with what you're doing or not?
Yeah.
So the conclusion section is really important, and it's really important to remember that the conclusion is not a summary. So what many people do, they are tired by the time they write the conclusion, and then they just summarize what they've written elsewhere, even using similar phrases. No, the conclusion is the last chance you have to restate what you found, but with new words, with new phrases, and to capture the gist, the essence of what you found. So then, it's like, let's say, complementary to the abstract, but in the conclusion you're not saying, I did these methods, I had this motivation, this we know it by now, you know? So tell us again your main thesis and go to the heart of it. Your main thesis and the contribution. Now, some people do that, but I am against that, and I've heard many people who are against that. Don't introduce new things and new ideas, new concepts, new references in the conclusion, you know? Don't open up new debates there. Do it in the discussion if you want. If you want to refer to something else you didn't cover and you think that your study could link to a new type of research or new research questions you are opening, but don't do that in the conclusions. If you want a rule of thumb, don't use any citation in your conclusion, unless it's one citation that links to your overall contribution or something. You know, we use Harvey, I think, in our article. Like
the last phrase is not nice, a little opening on something.
yeah, this can be. I mean, we discussed it, I think, sometime with Diego. No, that sometimes geographers, especially, they finish with a sentence that is like this: call in arms. No, you can do that too, but I mean with moderation, I think.
Would you spell out your contribution in the conclusion?
Like summarize it again. In the discussion, you have expanded it and explained it a lot, but in the conclusion, you go back and you hammer it. Let's say. Okay, this is from the same paper about the democratization that we said before, no? This is how it concludes. It's not just that, it has more, but that's the first paragraph of the conclusion. This paper has offered a simple model of democratization and political reform and investigated the implications for the dynamics of growth and inequality. So it reminded us what they did and why, no? The two main contributions of this paper are: one, it explains why the rich elite may want to extend the franchise. Two, it offers a new explanation for the presence of a Kuznets curve in the development experience of Western societies. Two things. One is a little bit more practical, no, like historical explanation. Second is more theoretical contribution. Very clearly stated, as clearly as possible. Okay, this I'll pass, but in the biopolitics article, for example, we are saying at the end also, okay, what this might tell us about the policies in Turkey for temporary migrants, for seasonal migrants. So we're saying, okay, the policies of the Turkish state, which are very similar to the policies promoted now by the European Union, they are not reducing the vulnerability of these people, you know? That's let's say, the how-to part of our article, change your policies. But our conceptual contribution is to understanding the vulnerabilities of seasonal workers is different, okay? So these were the elements, let's say, the building blocks of a good article. We have 25 minutes, no? Okay. So now I want to move to a little bit overall, the overall picture of the article. So I want to say two things about the overall article. One thing is to pay attention to the cohesion of the different parts we just discussed. And the second is attention to details. Cohesion. What I mean is that it's not enough just to do well in each of these separate parts, but the whole thing to tie together. So what I see very often in early writing is that many times there's no cohesion between the different parts. So there is a motivation, and then the research questions are slightly different, and then the methods used and the answers given are not answering to the research questions. Does this sound familiar or not? It sounds familiar because it's very common, no? So you put some research questions, or they are very broad, and then what you do, only you think that you're answering these research questions. Other people are saying there's something different happening here. Or sometimes what we said before, you start with a motivation or a quote from something an interviewee told you that sounds something, and then you go in a different direction. So people think you're going this way and you go that way. So cohesion is very important. We're going to see how you can do it in the planning phase to improve this cohesion. And very important is also at the end, when you're saying, okay, I'm contributing that to the literature, that what you're claiming you're contributing, it's directly backed by what you claim you found, your main arguments and results. So another typical mistake is sometimes people, when they say what they contribute to the literature, they bring new ideas and they say, okay, what did I contribute? And then they say something new, but that's not directly relevant to what they found. Your main contribution is what you found. This you have to think, like, what did this particular study that I did find that it's new, and how this is contributing to broader debates, not generally how my study might be contributing. Familiar or not as a problem? Share experiences if you want. So attention to details. That might sound trivial, but it's not trivial. Okay, a few don'ts. So abstract and opening sentences, super important. Check them 100 times that you don't have spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, any mistakes, because I'm gonna say why. But especially the beginning is really important because it gives an impression for the rest of the document. The rest of the document things can escape you, that's normal. But especially the abstract and the first two paragraphs of the introduction, pass them to a friend, pass them to a native speaker and say, please check it 100 times to make sure there is no mistake there. I would suggest always to have a native speaker, which means an native English-speaking person, to check your manuscript at the end if you're not a native speaker, okay? I think we must always do it. Someone who can tell you, okay, the grammar here is wrong. Another thing to pay attention, very often what we misspell are either authors, places, or concepts. This is really important not to misspell, because if you misspell an author, Vingedo, for example, many people misspell him now, for good reasons, but if you misspell him too often, it means you haven't read him that closely, you know? The name hasn't stuck to your head. So if you have him as a main reference in your work, and you keep misspelling it with a V and an I, you know, it means, okay, it creates a little bit of a feeling, okay, this paper is not that serious. We're gonna come back why this is important. Another thing is pay attention to formalities of a journal, like page numbers, references. Okay, you can't be perfect, you might do mistakes in references, but if your references are too sloppy, they also give a sloppy feeling. And all these things are small details, but they count a lot in the final result. I've been a reviewer, and trust me, you know, they count a lot. Like when you see something, a lot of things are going indirectly in your head that determine you. If you see too sloppy name referencing, or if you see your own name misspelled, Giorgos, no? How you spell me, Federico, means this guy doesn't know me. He's still, after 5 years, he misspells my name, you know? I say he's not so serious with it.
Your email misspells you. Your email
in the book.
It's Giorgos.
But John does it too.
But you're not saying like follow like the APA style or the Chicago style. Is this so important in?
No, follow the style of your journal. Follow the style of your journal.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Every journal has a different style. So
pay attention to it.
So even in the first draft, like you don't know if it's gonna be.
No, when you submit it, now I'm saying when you submit it.
Yeah. But even in the first submission, I'll not wait until.
No.
We have.
I mean, for the references also, if you don't get the reference style of the journal, but at least all your references are consistent, it's fine, you know? But be consistent, because if your references are different, each reference is in a different style, that's also a turn-off for the reviewer. You know, it's like, okay, someone didn't put the whole time here to finish the article.
And some journals state explicitly, like, do it this way. So then if you don't...
So another thing I say sometimes, okay, this is a detail, but another I give sometimes is avoid too grandiose statements, especially at the beginning, you know. I think if there is emotion and sentimentality in your paper, let it speak for itself, you know. Don't overpump it. I don't know if you know what I mean here, or you can imagine what I mean, you know. But it's like a good movie, you know. A good movie, if it's all the time crying and emotions, etc., it's a mellow. If it's like just a very simple story that shocks you and then you go cry, that's a good movie, you know. It speaks for itself. You don't have to, you know. This capitalism is, you know, take it easy, no? So why do details matter? Someone might say, okay, this is too detailed, why should we care about details? Because, first of all, your readers and your reviewers are humans and they get annoyed, you know? So if you get a manuscript, like for all of us, it's a lot of time to review things. If we get a manuscript and it's full of mistakes, errors, it's like, oh my God, you know, I can't be doing that, you know? So you get pissed with a writer. And the readers get pissed. I mean, because nowadays the journals do very bad editing job, you know. They've outsourced everything in India, low cost, Elsevier, for example, and the papers are published full of English mistakes and typos. I mean, it's insane. You might say, okay, if I pass the review process, what do I care? No, you care, because we said at the beginning you want your readers to read it and enjoy it, understand it, cite it, you know. If your paper is full of mistakes in the first paragraphs, even if it's published, it's a turn-off, you know, say, look, I'm not gonna waste my time to read that. I'll read Foucault who write it better, you know. I mean, we have limited time to read things. Why would we read an article that has mistakes, you know, like a lot of mistakes? It's like, but also I think, because it reflects on you. Imagine, you read a paper and you don't know who is the author. So as a reviewer, even if you don't want, implicitly you're making some judgments on the person, and psychologically you make some judgments on when you're writing something. So if you see a lot of mistakes, indirectly the thought, I mean, I've thought about it, but indirectly your feeling is like, okay, if it's sloppy in the writing, probably it's an overall sloppy research, you know? That's not correct. Maybe someone who's very good in the research, but then in the writing got sloppy or got tired or whatever. But indirectly, that's how you feel. Okay, sloppy writing, probably sloppy research. So this already guides you in a negative way. So please pay attention to the details and not take them as a boring task that you'll do if your paper is accepted, etc. But also because right now we're not doing research that it's becoming headlines, you know. But if you ever do research that it's hitting the headlines, and you might hit it like as Marti did, no? Saying about pollution in the Amazon from oil companies, you know, then people get attention to you. And then details matter a lot, you know, because people can pick up on one stupid thing you've done and then magnify it and destroy your whole argument. Even if the rest of the argument holds, you know. So like David Graeber in his famous book about debt, a history of 5,000 years, attracted a lot of attention. And because it attracted a lot of attention, attracted also the attention of economists, who don't like neither his argument about debt and debt jubilee, and they don't like also an anthropologist getting in their waters. So what did they find in Graeber's book? That at some point he has this story that he says how the internet industry started in San Francisco. So he says and he wants to say that it was a commoning process, okay? So he says in the 1960s, people would sit with their laptops in the backyards and start new companies there, you know? What's the problem with that?
There were no laptops.
There weren't laptops. So this was a very stupid mistake, but I've seen it magnified so much to say, okay, this David Graeber, what the economists say, we don't know what he does in his anthropology part, but in the parts we understand he does so many mistakes that probably the anthropology part also has a lot of mistakes and inaccuracies. He has also some other inaccuracies about how the Federal Reserve works, etc., that he didn't know so well. He said there are 7 people while there are 12. So they picked up on all these stupid details to dismantle the whole argument. That's also what they tried to do with Piketty. You know, the Financial Times went and they said, oh, the data for 1895 for Sweden is the same as 1877, you know? And I guess some research assistant of Piketty that day must have seated in his or her months, you know, because called and said, what's happening there, you know? They tried to destroy the whole book on that, but the guy was so strong that the data was correct. He didn't even make a sloppy mistake. So he explained why it was the same data for 2 years, because that was the method. If you didn't have data for 1 year, you passed it to the next. But imagine, you know, like they tried to destroy a book of 600 pages for some entry mistakes in particular years. So you might not do something that is so important, but you are aspiring to, so pay attention to not make mistakes.
But actually this is a good sign when they are trying to find the mistakes in what you do, because this means you are becoming relevant.
Yeah, but it's even better if you don't have mistakes.
Yes.
It's good if
then you can back up.
Yeah, no, I mean, Piketty was nice because they did all this fast and then he said like one by one, none of this is a mistake. And then, but even so, they created this fast that he was wrong and it stayed. So the right wing says like, oh, Piketty's book was wrong, you know, that's how it stayed in the media. So even, they can do it even if you don't have a mistake. So that's, okay, writing style advice. So a few don'ts for how to write, and this is from a book I found which is very good by Paul Sylvia, which is called How to Write a Lot. So when you write, okay, a few basic things. Don't try to sound smart. We already saw that. Don't feel that what you're writing is too simple and you have to sound complicated. You know, if you can say things simply, say them simply. Don't try to show your smartness or your ability to use complicated vocabulary, etc. Use good everyday words. As much as you can, use everyday words, not trendy phrases or phrases you saw in other articles and you think they sound important. If you can say something with good everyday words, use them. If you need theory to say something extra, use the theoretical term, but don't use it for the sake of it. As a general rule, avoid abbreviations, acronyms, numbers of laws. So all these things that they tire the reader, you know. like ABD, which is an organization, according to law 113/1979, declared, this is really boring writing, you know? So avoid it as much as possible. Describe what the law was about, give it a name, give a name to the organization, a shortcut. If it's an organization with 5 words named, just use one and then say after I'm going to refer to this organization with this name. Give it a name, you know? Don't use acronyms too much, yes.
For example, if you have an actor that comes again and again and again in your paper and it's like a long name and you use a lot of your word count, for example, government of Spain, or would you be able to write just GOS?
No. Government of Spain, you should say government of Spain. If you say GOS, is exactly what I'm saying. Doesn't go right. No. GOS is like really boring because someone will read GOS and then they will forget what it is. That also it doesn't read well. Imagine, I mean, you don't have to be a novelist, but imagine a writer giving you shorthands for GOS, you know? You'll never see that. Like, try to write in a more, you want to give pleasure also, we said, to your writer, to your reader, not partly. So it's pleasurable when you don't have all these acronyms.
Yeah, for me it's like, I find when I go through a paragraph or a section that uses lots of acronyms that I don't understand, I just sort of like get turned off and I don't really want to read it. And then you also spend a lot of time, like say you find something, oh, where did you do
Where did you do, yeah. So acronyms is a bad idea, okay? Unless it's a fairly established acronym in your community, like life cycle assessment, people call it LCA, so okay, there it's, or the UN. Okay, let's not exaggerate now. But government of Spain, exactly, GOS, no one knows what it is. So it's a bad idea. So some words to avoid, generally, when you edit your text, words that you can see and say, okay, these words I can take them out, are words that they are just putting like a quantitative sense to a qualitative argument, but they're not adding anything, like very, quite, basically, actually, virtually, completely, at all.
Also because it's indefinite. Like it's not a clear-cut quantity you are saying. It's
no, it's not about quantity. Sorry, this was not so exactly. But if you can take these words out, you know, if you say it was a quite important development, okay, it was an important development. Why it was quite important development, you know? They did not progress at all. Why at all? They did not progress. Full stop, you know? So all these things sometimes are redundant. If they really have meaning, you keep them. If not, just take them out, you know? They're like noise, as we're going to hear in the afternoon in the presentation. When you use magnitudes, be precise. I think we did this in the research design class, we said it. But if you say many people, or too many, or too much, or a few of the interviewees, this is a problem I always have. A few of the interviewees, okay, what does it mean, a few? Out of the 30 you interviewed, how many? Be precise when you use numbers, you know? Many people in United States? No. What does it mean, many people in United States? Like 5% of the United States, 50? Why many? According to whom are they many? So whenever you use quantitative characterizations, try either to take them out if you can't back them up and be specific, or if you can be specific, like in the number of interviews, be specific.
What about some?
Some, also, out.
But if you put like the majority or most of the interviews, you read like above 50%. This could not be
Okay, then be specific. More than half of the interviews, not the majority. Because the majority, I don't know what exactly means. The electoral majority, it can be like, if you have 15 interviews, it can be 12 or 10, or it can be 8, which makes a difference, you know? So I would say like, you can be specific there. Out of the 15 interviews, like 12 would feel associated with this statement, you know? Why be vague? So don't be vague with quantitative characterizations. Another thing when you write, and that's crucial, it's to avoid the passive tense, especially for many of us who are not English speakers. We think that if we use the passive, it's more formal, it's more scientific or something, you know? It's not. The more direct, especially in English, the more direct you are, you have an object, a subject, a verb, and an object. The subject that it's acting on something, not something that it's acted upon. Okay? So for example, this is indicative of, this is passive. This indicates is active. So always use the more you can use active, the better, you know? Try to use as much as possible active. Yes.
Some people say that you should also try to avoid using the infinitive. So, for example, this is indicating that, but I wonder, I find it hard not to use that. I wonder if you've heard that.
You can use the present, no? This indicates.
Yeah, I don't know, but
I'm not sure about that, yeah.
if you make longer sentences, it becomes more difficult.
Very often, like we want to use the passive to avoid using I or we.
That's something very European, I think. In the States, they always. I had a friend who was a colleague who is from the States, and he was always like, I hate this German obsession with, you know, passively the researcher did that. You did that, so it's okay to write I did that. It's not, you know.
I think if it's I did that, it's very good. I'm fine with using it. I did that or we did that. If it's a political statement and then it becomes too much, I believe and I think and I do, you know, then it can become a little bit more problematic. And I think there it's better to use a more neutral term, you know, about the statement you're making. But again, the statement should be expressed in active terms, not in passive terms, okay? But if it's about doing things, I think actually it's an advantage to say I did that. You know, I interviewed 30 people, you know, this is registers also on the reader, you know, okay, she did a lot of work, you know, rather than the researcher or someone else. Or the worst is 30 people were interviewed for the purposes of this research. It's a standard expression, no? You think that it sounds more scientific. No, it's passive, it's boring. I interviewed 30 people, you know? 10 of them were women, 20 of them men. That's as specific as it gets. Many people were interviewed for this research. That's the worst possible, no? Unclear magnitude, unclear people, passive tense. Unclear by whom they were interviewed.
That relates to don't try to sound smart. And also in the reviewer's comments to your article, it's like don't be overly didactic.
Don't be overly didactic,
and
you say,
I'm
but
wondering what it means exactly. Like,
because in the first version of our article, when I read it again, I think we were too normative, you know, it should be like that, it is like that, it was a little bit didactic, saying like, okay, this is how things should be, or this is what you should know, you know. It wasn't analytical, you know, this is how we explain a particular novel through the lens of the growth, or the growth through the lens of a particular novel. It was like, it should be like that, it was a little bit too didactic.
That's why I'm wondering if you use these things like indicates, or like, you know, like very direct sentences, if you start sounding less scientific. I got that.
No, but that's the thing. I mean, it's your content and what you're saying that makes the difference, not the words you use. That's really important what Amélie said. She said, like, if we use the passive tense, we might sound more scientific and less didactic. No, it is what you're saying that should make the difference, you know? And what your main arguments are, not the words you're using. So your words should always be direct. Change what you're saying so not to be didactic, not how you say it.
Yes, but we use also possibly, and you know, some words that perhaps. It is like I like to leave space for ambivalence and ambiguity. Like
that's the opposite of writing a scientific article.
It's not only that.
When you're making abstract theoretical kind of arguments, you're not advocating for something. You are opening up a space for thinking, and you are inviting people that perhaps this is a different vision. So for me, using perhaps is important, because I'm not trying to make like very exact, you know, 50% show me that this is how it should be.
No, but you're confusing two different things. So the 50% is if and when you need to use numbers. I didn't say use numbers. I said if you're using something that has a quantitative characterization, be precise. If you don't want to use it, it's fine, you know. But when you use it, you have to be precise. So it's a different argument. I didn't say don't use perhaps and use numbers, you know. I said when you use something that's quantitative, be precise. Perhaps, of course, you can use it, but the point is, are you using it because you really mean perhaps, or are you using it as a filler, or because you're uncertain about what you're saying?
No, it's because you are actually not concerned, you are respectful to the audience, and you show that this is an argument that you perhaps may not want to accept,
Okay, so then you have to explain, no, but then you have to explain why you might not want to accept it. So it's content-wise. So if you say perhaps, and you leave it open why it's a perhaps, it's not a good perhaps. If you say,
explain why, yeah.
not of course, very often it doesn't. I mean, if you read papers many times, there are fillers like perhaps, or maybe, or somewhat, or quite, where your uncertainty, you transpose it in the text. If you say perhaps and then you explain why it is perhaps and not for sure, it's fine.
Yes, but we can. It is a nice idea, I think, a little bit to discuss for this because it makes sense. For instance, when someone reads Harvey, that's someone that probably most of us have read, his style is very strict for my gusto. Yes, it's very like he tries always to put things very clearly in boxes and then gives a clear argument. For me, I doesn't like this at all.
Yeah, but that's
and
content.
I don't enjoy it at all.
Yeah, but that's content related. Like in your content, you can say like, okay, this is one thesis and that's another thesis, you know. But that's content related. It's not just the style of writing. You might say
it is also the style of writing.
Okay, you might say that there is a competition of the style. Okay.
Or for instance, De Angelis, on the other hand, writes like a little bit more. Somehow tells you, invites you to participate in this dialogue, and others more than De Angelis. And for me, to me, are much more interesting, and I respect much more their work, and because they invite me to participate. They don't say me, I know this, I know this, I know this, we don't know this. Okay, take it and
I'm insisting, that's a matter of content. So generally, my point is that, for example, when I say about arguments, I always say get in dialogue with counter-arguments. So I'm arguing these three things. What could be counter-arguments to that? What other people have said? So you're always in dialogue with others. This by itself is different from what you're saying, because if you're in dialogue, and you're saying like, okay, maybe I'm arguing this, okay, then it depends how certain you want to be that you are right and they are wrong, you know? Or you might say, this is what I'm arguing, and it's a different perspective, I might be right or I might be wrong in these elements. Each writer has their own style in that, but that's content related, it's not form related. I'm focusing here on form. So, of course, if your content is that you're very sure about what you're saying, then maybe your form can get very strict and not have any of these doubts there. So, I mean, this you find the balance to explain. But what I'm saying here is that many times the words you add express just your own doubt about whether you really know what you're saying, you know? And you just want to tone it down. That's more common. So now I'm talking, yes, about De Angelis versus Marx or Harvey now, you know? We're talking about us here, you know? So many times when you use virtually, perhaps, or at all, we do it because we are not sure and we use these fillers to feel like, okay, no one can tell me that I said something very stupid because I said perhaps, you know? So this to avoid. It's very common, this.
No, I know it's common, but I think at least what I was trying to say is precisely that it's not in the trivial use of maybe or perhaps, but it's in the more...
Okay, we understand that, but what I'm saying is like what I'm...
Style is a philosophical issue también, and it's not just like a format that is a box that you can just tick. It's also, it's a personal way of writing, and because it's a personal, it's a very profound way of thinking, and you have to kind of be honest with yourself and with the audience. So the style is also a philosophical issue of how you write. It's your philosophy of writing. You see, I think this is what also Angelos is trying to say.
And we fall all together into this conformism of American writing. That is not the only.
No, but I mean, like, okay, there is the American writing which is very specific, now very straight to the point. I like it a lot. My personal preference is for that over the French writing. If you can do the French writing and you do it well, it's fine. But if you're a poor French writer, it's like much worse than being a poor American writer. So this is where you take your risks, you know? That's the issue.
It's not perhaps.
Okay, so take your risks there. You know, but that's my personal thing. I really like to read like when people are explaining the bottom line of what they are saying. You know, but sometimes I agree. You know, that it's not possible, or some ideas need to explain complex. If really your complexity is reflecting the complexity of your thinking and your argument, is fine. If the complexity of your writing is just reflecting your inability to still write well, then it's not fine. So, but of course it depends, and you never know what of the two is happening, no?
Yeah.
So, just get the comments of the people who read your text fairly there. So that's...
No, I just wanted to support your argument because I think the key word is cohesion. Because also Harvey and De Angelis, despite their different in terms of content, they're both very coherent. They take you from motivation to a kind of question to a kind of argument. So I think it is different writing style, but at the same time you can enjoy both. Despite it.
No, the structure is the same. So what Giorgos is saying is that even if the writing style is different and the authors are very different, the underlying structure, what we said, the motif, is always there. You know, even if the dance looks very different, the steps, the basic steps are similar. You know, even in the most diverse of writers. Now, your writing style, you strike it, you know, and you also follow your preference. So, for me, I mean, it took me time to say, okay, this is the writing style I prefer more. You can like a different style. I'm not arguing for writing style here. What I'm arguing is to avoid the unnecessary words in your text, unless they really play a point, you know. If you say perhaps, you really need the perhaps there. It's not because you add the perhaps or because you add something to make it seem more important. That's all I have to say about style. Okay, so break now.